Welcome back to CBS This Morning. We just showed you how many parents are worried about the new school year. As we continue our special School Matters series, we're joined by CBS News senior medical correspondent, Dr. Tara Narula, and she's here to answer your questions. Tara, good morning. We heard some of the questions before. We're going to go to them now. The first comes from Melanie, who wants to know what to do if her child has chronic seasonal allergies. She asks, are they going to be sent home all the time?
That's such a great question, and I know a lot of parents who are wondering the same thing. If my child goes to school and sneezes or coughs or says they don't feel well, what cascade is that going to trigger? And so this is really a great time to do two things: plan and communicate. So you want to communicate and plan with your school and your school nurse if they have one, and really tell them, my child has seasonal allergies. This is typically how they present. This is how we treat them. And then you want to talk to your pediatrician or allergist and get them on a good regimen. A lot of allergy planning and treatment involves starting medications early. And then one last tip is that the kids are going to be wearing masks. Those masks can attract pollen and hold it in, so you want to make sure you're washing those regularly. And one little plug for vaccination, very important during flu season, because that's something else that can potentially be confused with COVID.
All right, good advice there. The next question comes from Lindsay, who asks, how will the lack of in-person social interaction between our younger kids impact their learning and development?
I love this question because I love the fact that she's talking about social emotional learning. This is really critical now, almost more than ever. And when we talk about social emotional learning, we're talking about kids learning things like empathy, how to make decisions, how to communicate, how to regulate their emotions, and even talk about their feelings. And really, that's something that needs to be built into the classroom. And while it's harder to do with distance learning, it's something that can be done online. Teachers can incorporate that into their curriculum. Families can talk about those things at home and really ask their children how they're feeling and teach them how to regulate their emotions. And especially if they have siblings, it's something they can work on. And I think the important thing here is that kids are resilient. And if anything, this is going to build resilience in our children. And really, ultimately, what they need is a loving, safe, secure environment. So as long as you're providing that, our kids are going to be just fine.
Tara, with so many students learning remotely, one viewer wants to know if there are concerns about young children spending so many consecutive hours in front of a screen.
Well, I have two little ones as well, and we talk a lot about screen time in our house. And it's not really a black and white issue right now. We do need to be flexible. And in fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics released a statement in March acknowledging the fact that we are going to see increase in screen time use. The two important things really being the content and the context. And so using those screens to interact with family and friends is important. Obviously, using it to learn is going to be critically important. And what the AAP really suggests is that you preserve offline activities. So things like the fact that it doesn't interrupt with sleep or reading or even connecting with family, exercise, and just downtime to reflect.
Yeah, we all need a little of that. We also heard from Sarah, who is a grandmother who will be caring for her 8- and 12-year-old grandchildren after school. She asks, how do I protect myself and my husband from possible spread of COVID while they're here?
Well, this is a tough question, and the reality is we're learning more and more each day about how much children really do transmit, even if they're asymptomatic. And I think, clearly there are things you can do in the home, like cleaning, disinfecting, having proper ventilation, opening the windows. But then when the kids come home, there's little steps you can take, like having them take their shoes off at the door, making sure they wash their hands, leaving their backpacks and belongings maybe by the front door, and even changing their clothes. All of these little things can go a long way, but it's definitely a tricky situation when you have people who are elderly caring for young children, and those elderly may be at increased risk of severe complications from COVID.
One more quick one, Tara, if we could. Pam wants to know how long COVID could actually live on books and surfaces.
Well, we still think that the primary route of transmission is droplets or even potentially airborne, and not really through contact. There have been some studies that have shown that COVID can live on surfaces for hours to days. So cleaning and disinfection is going to be important. And really, the CDC is recommending that schools not only do that, but really avoid having kids share things like pencils or markers or things that couldn't be cleaned very easily, to have their own cubby and locker. So taking these little steps is going to be important because we don't have all the answers yet on exactly how long it can live on surfaces.
That's part of what makes it so confusing. Tara, thank you so much. We would also like to hear from students. We want to hear your questions about the school year, whether your classes are in person or online. Email your questions to coronavirus@cbsnews.com.